We are back with more Beatrix Potter. And remember, Beatrix Potter, all through as she was growing up, she drew her pets and whatever was around her, and that's how she developed the skill to make all of these very intricate and beautiful pictures. Is she just practiced and practiced, playing around, drawing the things that she saw, her pets, the woods, whatever it was she saw, and then imagining stories about them. This story, we are going to go back to Peter Rabbit. This is a story about his cousin, Benjamin Bunny, who apparently was the real life Benjamin Bunny, was Beatrix Potter's pet. One morning, a little rabbit sat on a bank. He pricked his ears and listened to the trit-trot of a pony. The gig was coming along the road, and it was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. As soon as they had passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off with a hop, a skip, and a jump to call upon his relations who lived in the woods at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. That wood was full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of them all lived Benjamin's aunt and cousins, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffetees. I once bought a pair at a bazaar. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He came around the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled on top of his cousin Peter. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. Oh, poor Peter, look at his clothes. Peter, said little Benjamin in a whisper, who has got your clothes? We know this story. Peter replied, the scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden, and described how he'd been chased about the garden and had dropped his shoes and coat. Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor was gone in a gig, and Mrs. McGregor also, and certainly for the day, because she was wearing her best bonnet. Peter said he hoped that it would rain. At this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hole, calling, Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch some more chamomile. Peter said that he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. They went hand in hand and got up on the flat top wall at the bottom of the wood. From there, they looked down at Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter's coat and shoes were plainly to be seen upon the scarecrow, topped with an old tam-o'-shanter of Mr. McGregor's. Little Benjamin said, it spoils people's clothes to squeeze under a gate. A proper way to get in is to climb down from the pear tree. Peter fell down head first, but it was of no consequence, as the bed below was newly raked and quite soft. It had been sown with the lettuces. They left a great many odd little footmarks all over the bed, especially little Benjamin, who was wearing clogs. Little Benjamin said it was the first thing to do was to get back Peter's clothes, in order that they might be able to use the pocket handkerchief. They took them off the scarecrow. It had been rain during the night, and there was water in the shoes, and the coat had somewhat shrunk. Benjamin tried on the tam-o'-shanter, but it was too big for him. Then he suggested that they should fill the pocket handkerchief with onions as a little present for his aunt. Peter did not seem to be enjoying himself. He kept hearing noises. Benjamin, on the contrary, was perfectly at home. He ate a lettuce leaf. He said he was coming into the habit of coming into the garden with his father to get lettuces for Sunday dinner. The name of Benjamin's papa was old Mr. Benjamin Bunny. The lettuces certainly were very fine. Peter did not eat anything. He said they should go home. Presently, he dropped half the onions. Little Benjamin said it was not possible to get back up the pear tree with a load of vegetables. He led the way boldly towards the other end of the garden. They went along a little walk plank under the sunny red brick wall. The mice sat on their doorsteps crackling cherry stones. The mice sat on their doorsteps cracking cherry stones. They winked at Peter Rabbit and the little Benjamin Bunny. Presently, Peter let the pocket handkerchief go again. They got amongst the flower pots and frames and tubs. Peter heard noises worse than ever. His eyes were as big as lollipops. He was a step or two in front of his cousin when suddenly he stopped. What could it be? This is what those little rabbits saw around the corner. Little Benjamin took one look, and then in half of a minute, less than no time, he hid himself and Peter and the onions under a large basket. The cat got up, stretched herself, and came and sniffed the basket. Perhaps she liked the smell of onions. Anyway, she sat down on top of the basket. She sat there for 5 hours. I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin under the basket because it was quite dark, and because the smell of onions was fearful, and it made Peter Rabbit and Benjamin cry. The sun got round behind the wood, and it was becoming late in the afternoon, and still the cat sat on the basket. At length there was a pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall in the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe of a rabbit tobacco and had a switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. Old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats. He took one tremendous jump off the top of the wall and onto the cat and cuffed it in the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat was too surprised to scratch back. When old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door. Then he came back to the basket and took out his son Benjamin by the ears and whipped him with a little switch. Then he took out Peter and switched him. Then he took the handkerchief of onions and marched out of the garden. When Mr. McGreggor returned about half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. It looked as though some person had been walking over the garden wearing a pair of clogs, only the foot markings were ridiculously little. He also could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse, locking the door from the outside. When Peter got home, his mother forgave him because she was glad to see that he had found his shoes and coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and Mrs. Rabbit strung the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling with the bunches of herbs and rabbit tobacco. The end.